No, nothing? Oh, that sounds like an experience right there. Travel, travel to the East Coast with a 1-year-old?
We're doing Flagstaff. You good?
Nice.
Someplace I haven't been.
And Flagstaff was all that was left.
It was weird. It's the family trip with my sisters
okay.
and my parents. That's where they chose this year. Okay.
It's a choice.
It is. I'm gonna do like Santa Fe and Albuquerque. And like
Does Grant come
you know,
in?
there's
Oh, the
packets.
Extra
packet. I got a few.
I'll take one. How's it going?
Great. Asking again though, is this transitions into the arts board meeting?
Oh, I wanted to talk to you about the dates after this, before that.
Okay.
I talked to Chris Ward today from the Parks and Rec.
We should, I can't imagine this will last too long. It's a one-item agenda, right?
One item split up into 5 items.
It's a one-item
Okay,
agenda.
it's a one item. I'm sorry. All right, we'll call the meeting to order at 5:31. Can we please do roll call?
Chair Josh Champagne,
Here.
Mayor Rosalind Grafstein,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Mark Bliss,
I'm here.
City Manager Melissa Marsh,
Here.
Commissioner Eric Gradinger,
Here.
Commissioner Melissa Kelnassi,
Here.
Commissioner Cliff Oglesby, Commissioner Grant Sylvester. Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Do we know?
Mr. Chair? Yes. Did anybody not here give us notice?
I didn't hear from Grant.
Mr. Chairman, I heard Commissioner Grant said he was coming, so possibly he
Okay.
could be here in a few minutes.
Okay, cool. Does anybody on Planning Commission have any additions or deletions to the agenda? Okay, no, we'll move forward. So next up then is approval of the minutes from the February 21st, 2023 meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
Motion to approve the minutes as printed?
thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll support.
Okay, so the motion is to approve the minutes as written. We will do yes to approve.
Yes.
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 Do I have any no's to not approve? Okay, motion passes then. So next up on the agenda is the public hearing, which we don't have anything on that. So the next is the meeting open to the public for items not listed on the agenda. Is there anybody from the public that would like to address Planning Commission?
Can we get your, yeah.
My name is Matthew Savaya, and I own Victoria's Jewels on 12 Mile DeQuinder, 28731 DeQuinder Road. So, thank you, Zoning Board, Commissioners. My name is Matthew Savaya. I am the owner of Victoria's Jewels. I recently appeared before Mayor Rosalind Grafstein and the City Hall Commissioner regarding a request to have my jewelry store converted into a pawn shop. While I appreciate the recognition, I have yet to make any progress with my request. I am here today to seek your support in acquiring the necessary permit to convert my store into the pawn shop. I firmly believe that doing so would serve the public good by providing essential services to the community while also helping my business to thrive. During a follow-up discussion with Mr. Matt Lonerstader, he suggested that I should explain in detail what pawn shops do for the community and what kind of services we would be offering. As a pawn shop, we will be offering critical services to the community, providing a place where people can buy and sell items of value, as well as offering loans to those who may not have any other resources available. Our goal is to help individuals who are in financial need and to provide them with a safe and secure way to obtain funds. I have been operating for over 13 years. I have 4 children and a wife. My family depends on our business for financial support. I do not want to leave my current location as it took a lot of time and effort to establish my business in this area. My lease is also coming to an end soon, and and the ongoing construction in front of the store is making it difficult to attract new customers. Converting my store into a pawn shop is a perfect solution, and as it will allow me to renovate and restructure my business plan to better serve the community. While I realize that zoning regulation and ordinance must be enforced, I believe that granting my request to convert my jewelry store into the pawn shop would have a positive impact on the community and as the local economy. I therefore respectfully request that you consider my request favorably and grant me the necessary permits to operate my business as a pawn shop. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else from the public that would like to address Planning Commission? Okay. Is there anybody in Planning Commission that would like to address what was just said?
Mr. Chair?
Okay, yes, please go ahead.
Maybe under new business or member updates, maybe we can cover the status of the conversation that the subcommittee had as it relates to uses like pawn shops, massage parlors, all those kind of things.
Yeah, recognizing that, I think this is coming up in the discussion. So, okay, perfect. Okay, good. Appreciate you bringing that to us. Thank you very much. Okay, so the next up is unfinished business. So zoning ordinance rewrite, update, and discussion, missing middle housing, accessory dwelling units, house density, and regulated uses. So I would like to turn this over to Planner Matt to give us some context.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On March 28th, as Councilor Bliss said, we met with the Zoning Ordinance Rewrite Steering Committee, had a productive discussion relating to the form-based code, mixed-use innovation districts, as well as just general discussion about the zoning ordinance rewrite. And at that meeting, the steering committee identified several topics that they wanted to bring back to the full Planning Commission for discussion, which include missing middle housing and housing diversity, and accessory dwelling units is one of the major topics. Mixed-use innovation building height also came up, so I'd like to bring that up today. And pertinent here is regulated uses, discussing the current list and if there are any changes that should be made as part of this zoning ordinance rewrite. So what I'd like to do is have this be more open-ended. I'd like to hit kind of each one as a separate discussion rather than go through all of them. I think it makes sense just to go through them one by one. So I wanted to start with the missing middle housing. The master plan that was adopted in 2021 has a section in it that specifically talks about Lincoln Avenue, and it says that Lincoln Avenue presents an opportunity to add higher density housing adjacent to single-family uses. This housing, known as missing middle housing, is essential to providing affordability to neighborhoods and should be compatible with surrounding neighborhood and scale. This includes duplex, triplex, quadplex dwellings and structures that look like single-family homes. The master plan also has a separate housing goal section, some of which state that Madison Heights should strive to provide a range of housing options, support neighborhoods by improving walkability, encourage reinvestment in neighborhoods, as well as ensure that development is compatible with the existing neighborhood. So this leads us to the discussion of missing middle housing. I'm not sure if you've all heard of this term, but in summary, what missing middle housing is, it describes the range of kind of lower to mid-density housing that used to be prevalent in American cities, especially like Rust Belt cities is a good example, duplexes, fourplexes, townhouses, but have since been prohibited through zoning ordinances that say you have to have only single-family detached housing. So there are examples of missing middle housing throughout these cities. The problem is it's really hard to build new ones, so we're stuck with what we have. There is a big demand for these types of missing middle housing, because first and foremost, they're more affordable than having a single-family detached structure on every lot. They're smaller units, they can accommodate a wider range of residents. So going with the master plan, I wanted to bring up this topic to see if it's something we wanted to incorporate into the zoning ordinance. So here are some examples of missing middle housing types. These are duplexes, side by side on the left, and then stacked on the right, which is just one on top of another. And then we have multiplexes, which typically only have one door, but they can accommodate 3 to 4 units. And then townhomes, which are individual dwelling units stacked side by side. So right now, in our current zoning ordinance, in our current zoning map, we do have an RT district, which stands for two-family residential, and we have one entire parcel in the whole city. So I had to zoom in to show you where it is on Lincoln. And here's what it is, right? It's a duplex. So that's what we got for RT. So the question is this a type of housing, maybe not this design, we can incorporate design standards, but should we allow for more missing middle housing types, the lower density duplexes, multiplexes, and townhomes in the city of Madison Heights? If so, where should they be? And then what type of standards should we incorporate? So before we get into the discussion, I wanted to let you know where we are in the draft. We're talking about renaming the RT district to residential mixed neighborhood. So instead of just two-family, it's opening up the types of units. The name is flexible at this point. That was just something we came up with. The intent would be to expand it from that one parcel on Lincoln to pretty much the rest of Lincoln that is currently zoned single-family residential, as well as some parcels on 11 Mile that are currently zoned single-family residential. Right now, it's just townhomes and duplexes, but we could expand the list of uses, the residential uses, to include 3 to 4 unit multiplexes, townhomes, live-work units, et cetera, and then incorporate design standards. So if we do get duplexes, we're not emphasizing a big driveway and a big garage front. So we chose Lincoln as a good place to try to start this because the existing conditions already show missing middle housing. We have townhomes on East Lincoln. We have, I think that might be a triplex or a quadplex on the bottom right. We have multifamily apartments, and then local commercial businesses. So all of these kind of play together to allow for slightly higher residential densities. So going back to the guiding questions, wanted to get the conversation started about missing middle housing.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
I'm pretty sure that on Wolverine, there is some kind of a duplex with an upper and a lower.
Okay.
So would they be there, when they were there?
Wolverine,
before?
is that that's just a residential street?
Yeah,
right?
it is.
It's right off Lincoln.
Right off of
I know
Lincoln.
where she's talking about.
I think there's a couple of them.
Yeah, they're kind of set back in a little bit, and they've been there for
Ever.
50s.
Yeah.
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 So
So-
those were probably because they were grandfathered in from before.
Right, so the options would be to leave it as is as a grandfathered use, or we could zone that specific parcel, or go around and look to see where there are existing duplexes and zone them.
Yeah,
as-
I can think of two very specific ones. One's on Wolverine and another one is in that general area.
Okay.
And one is, you're right, the one is way set back, but the other one is just looks like a house.
Yeah, and
A bit
then it's
larger.
further up, I think right near it.
Yeah, they're very close.
Yeah, right next to each other, I think, or there's a couple of houses.
Very close. So, I am all for this. I grew up on a street where when you went down, there were some big houses that weren't actually houses. There were duplexes and fourplexes and triplexes. And when you got up there and you saw that, but they completely kept the character of the rest of the street and the neighborhood. So I'm all for this.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, please go ahead.
just so we can get the council people out of the way and let all y'all talk. I also, I kind of look at this as, we're going to take existing properties. They're likely going to have heavy construction done on them, if not a tear down and replacement, which is going to bring in a lot of great taxable revenue for the city. And I kind of look at it as even expanding. From my point of view, any high traffic street that residential's on, I don't see a problem with this use. You know, and that could, like, Gardenia might be another example for parts of Gardenia, Lincoln, 11, 12, 13, anywhere you have that residential off of a main or high-traffic road in the city, I don't see why we would want to eliminate the option. So, but that is my 2 cents. Now I want to hear what the subcommittee said.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, please go ahead.
I know where the houses that she talked about, I used to do a paper route in that area when I was like 10 years old, and it was there then, and it looked old then. That's how long it's been around. And there's, I'm not sure how many units are in, I'm guessing 4 or something back in that one big brick one, and you would never know it if you drove down Wolverine, you never know what's there. But you can set up the criteria so that you almost, it blends in so well with the neighborhood, you don't know that's what it is. Like the one with the one door, you would think that that was just a nice, upper, fancier place, but when you get in there, there's more units. And you can do that so it's a little more appealing to the neighborhood and where you want the neighborhood to go into the future, so I don't have a problem with that at all.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, please go ahead.
As many affordable options as possible, especially with the ever-increasing cost of living and housing. It seems like with, the more options we have on the table, the broader the zoning for this type of middle housing, just the better for, making Madison Heights an enticing and attractive place to kind of move and stay. In terms of like the size of the zone, is there like a recommended zone size to kind of, encourage development when it comes to middle housing?
I'm sorry, by zone size, do you mean like lot size, or
Or
do you
just
mean-
even like the entire zone area, like if it was very limited, right?
Right.
I don't know, is blue the proposed?
No, so, sorry,
downtown district?
just to clarify, what's
Yeah,
proposed
sorry.
right now is outlined here, it's this hashed yellow. So we have, any portion of Lincoln that isn't we have portions of Lincoln that are currently zoned multifamily residential, and local business. So those would remain in a, residential, multifamily residential or business. But anywhere that was currently single-family would be proposed to be upped to this, this mixed residential district. So single-family homes are still allowed by right. It just also allows duplexes and multiplexes and townhomes. And then East 11 Mile, touching upon what Councilor Bliss said, from my opinion, doesn't necessarily make sense to have one little strip of single-family homes surrounded by business, a lot of times regional businesses. So single-family homes are still conforming, they're still allowed by right, but it allows for slightly higher density given that it's an arterial roadway or collector roadway going through the city. And then Gardenia, we thought about, the question is, do we want to ease into it, or do we want to just kind of allow this in as many places as we think is good?
Can I weigh in on that? I think more is okay. But I want to ask some questions for where we think maybe we want to expand into some more spots. So on Lincoln, you have, what is the zoning for brown, pink, and blue?
Here, yeah, so, I apologize, I do have the full map up there, but I don't have the full one in the presentation, but in this map, the dark blue is our city center.
Sure.
The light blue is our mixed-use innovation 2 district, which is encouraging more artisan manufacturing, mixed residential, more industrial, commercial mixed uses. Purple, or actually this is gray, so that's light industrial. Further on 11 Mile, we have more mixed-use innovation 1. This red here is our B2 neighborhood commercial district.
So along Lincoln, even where you showed that example earlier, I think it might be in the area that's brown and pink between John
Oh,
R.
yeah.
and 75.
I'm sorry, and brown
Is-
is multifamily residential.
Okay, so that was like permitted because that's already for that.
Yeah, and we
then?
would keep that as multifamily residential, because this would actually be a down zoning for that parcel, which we don't want to do.
Okay. So we would, like, what if someone wanted to do the couple parcels, what is that, west of John R. at Lincoln that are currently zoned, you said it's mixed, use innovation right now?
Mixed-use innovation allows for mixed-use developments and townhomes. So they couldn't necessarily do a duplex or triplex there, but it does encourage, even live-work units could be where you have retail on the bottom. But the duplex model proposed right now wouldn't be allowed, or the triplex wouldn't be allowed in the mixed-use innovation.
So there's just a very limited space then on Lincoln. So then everything else on Lincoln could be ultimately residential, right?
Yeah,
To
majority.
varying density? Where you have it marked off?
Yeah, anywhere then marked off is proposed in this draft to go to that mixed neighborhood residential, which could go anywhere from a single-family detached up to a multiplex/townhome style development.
Okay, so then I guess my next question, when we started to think about where else would we want to do it, since you brought that up, I would think that areas adjacent to what we're considering downtown, to add density right on the edge of what the business district that we're trying to encourage, that I expect we will see investment down the road after all this ordinance rewrite is done, because we'll be allowing those types of things more easily. I don't know exactly what my recommendation is, other than I think that there's probably some space for us to allow some of this. If someone were to say, I'm going to take 2 houses down and I want to put up a quad or something, and it's right next to the, the business districts, I feel like that's something that I would be able to support. So when we look at areas to expand to, it's where do we want people to be that will support the businesses that we're trying to attract to Madison Heights?
Okay, so if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Just to, what I think you're saying maybe would be north to south, it's a little tricky because you have the block network, the grid network doesn't work that way, but when you go along 11 Mile and you start talking about, 2 to 3 houses in.
Yes.
Is that kind of along the lines of what you're saying? That way you ease into the neighborhood where it's slightly decreasing in density and you get into the.
Sure, and it makes it really easy for foot traffic, to increase density of residents for foot traffic where we're trying to encourage foot traffic type businesses.
You might need to go like 5 or 6 deep though, because those lots are not that big.
Sure, I mean, when we get to one of my other comments I wrote down too, allowing for parking in some of these spaces as well. Because let's say that I wanted to come in and I wanted to do something significant on 11 Mile, and I needed more parking, and I don't want to have to rely on the alley, maybe I want to take down a house or two. There's a part of me that says, from an economic development perspective, I'd like to give people some of that option as well, versus forcing cars to park out on the street, which I think is actually worse for residents versus actually pushing some of it in. But if you're starting to buffer that with duplexes or triplexes or quads, in addition to that, buffering that parking lot from the rest of the residents, I can see some good mix in there if we give some of those options for people.
If I might jump in.
Yes, please.
So I definitely agree with your idea of adding or mixed residential is what you guys are kind of going with.
Something, residential neighborhood in some order.
Okay, but some higher density residential options along the central corridors that we're discussing. I also know we talked about the idea of allowing for parking in those areas as well. I wonder if it'd be possible for us to establish a parking overlay district for that area rather than kind of going in between. I don't know, that's just a thought for the future, I guess. But generally in regards to this topic, I think it's critical, it's so important that we do bring more options, more affordable options into the city, and that will really help us diversify and appeal to people of all ages and ranges and lifestyles. Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and I think a lot of communities should be going towards this sort of regulation and standards, so I'm glad we're talking about actually putting it into place.
Thank you. Can I ask for a clarification? How would you envision a parking overlay district to work in your suggestion?
So I think we would, obviously, planning staff in the city would have to do some analysis, maybe with the consultants, as to where the most appropriate locations would be. But if we were to rezone or propose the zoning districts like 2 or 3, or maybe 5, like was discussed, like south or north of the dark blue district. But we could also just put like, it'd kind of be like a flexible zoning district that would lay on top. So those properties could be rezoned or developed for higher density residential. But if someone wanted to come in with a parking lot within that area, then that would also be allowed, but that wouldn't necessarily be allowed in other areas that are outside of the overlay district. Yeah, because I've seen it in other communities where they'll do like a marijuana overlay district and things like that too. Yeah, I don't know, maybe something to consider.
Mr. Chair, we are working
Thank you.
on a parking section of the ordinance, and it's kind of acts like a parking overlay, where as it's drafted now, it's saying within a certain distance of the city center district, a parking lot can be a special land use. So it's not allowed everywhere, and we have to review it to make sure that the screening is appropriate and that it's not negatively impacting adjacent residential. But because we set a distance, we're saying you can't put a parking lot, not that anyone would logically, but you can't put a parking lot in the center of the neighborhood and ruin the street flow or the streetscape. So we're working on the language there, but it's similar in intent, but it's not necessarily called an overlay at this
Right,
point.
okay.
Will we end up seeing some draft language for that as we go farther into the ordinance rewrite then?
Absolutely, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chair,
Yes, please.
can I just get everybody's take on expanding? Right now, we're talking like that 11 in Lincoln corridor. What are the thoughts of, like we have a lot of residential off of, well, not a lot, but there are select pockets on 12 and 13. There's residential off of 13, right?
I'm not moving.
But those would be, and I don't know if it's more of a with special use approval or how we want to go about that, but those could make a lot more sense as multifamily as opposed to single family with the right development. So,
I'll comment. I would actually be okay with every residential in the city being allowed to do some kind of duplex up to fourplex, depending on the size. So, if the law, if it doesn't make sense to take that lot, then no. But if we had some kind of minimums, because there are some larger lots in the city where it may make sense.
Okay, any other thoughts on this? From what I'm hearing is supportive of this and potentially look at additional location. Here's Gardenia, for example. Similar street type to Lincoln. You don't really have the variety of, I would say, neighborhood retail and apartments or townhomes as Lincoln, but that's not to say that it wouldn't be appropriate. You do have a lot of north-south roads, however, as a composed that don't have long blocks. See, it's only two deep, so that presents somewhat of a difference. But again, the road type is there. You do have on West Lincoln some longer blocks where you could accommodate it.
and I think, so we've talked a lot about like proximity to like restaurant and retail, but it's also proximity to schools. So this type of a development works really well within close proximity and walking distance to schools. So I would keep that in mind as well. We've got a lot of those like neighborhood schools, and that might be like, those parcels around it might be worthwhile. Just opening that up. But I'm also not opposed to having some sort of special use type approval or something, some contingency plan, just in case the development is not something that we'd want. But I do think we have to be more open. People aren't really banging on our doors right now to build this type of housing in the city. So the more that we can give some open and flexibility of where and when, I think that there's a lot of value in that.
Okay. All right, well, I can move on. That's very, very helpful. And I'm glad to see we'll be incorporating that into the draft for your review. Okay, so let's move on to another type of housing, which is called an accessory dwelling unit, or a granny flat, or an in-law suite, a bunch of different names. But the primary word here is accessory, in that it is, historically, is typically much smaller than the primary dwelling, and it is located in an area that is typically not highly visible from the road. It's either tucked away in the back, above a garage, in the basement in some cases. But typically they're one bedroom or a studio in design, no more usually than 2 people in one accessory dwelling unit. And again, this is a type of dwelling unit that historically has been there, but has been prohibited as zoning ordinances evolved and went more towards just single family only. So accessory dwelling units have a lot of good benefits. They provide, first and foremost, a more affordable housing option for a bunch of different types of households, students, single persons, family members that want to move closer to their sons or daughters. Affordable for the tenant, as well as providing additional income to the property owner, who could potentially lease it out to somebody and get rent for it. So there are a couple different types of accessory dwelling units. There's interior, which isn't that common, or at least it's harder to tell because it's inside the house. But more often than not, we see detached ADUs, either as like a cottage structure or attached to the back or side of an existing principal structure.
Little container home.
Yeah, as long as it meets the building code. So here's a picture of a detached one above an existing garage, or above a garage. It's possible that this was all constructed at the same time. Here's a detached one that's more of a cottage style. And then we have one off the side, either the side or rear of an existing principal structure. So again, some guiding questions for the Planning Commission. Do we like ADUs? Is this something we want to allow in the city? If so, where? Typically they're allowed accessory to single family homes, so that would open it up to any of the single family districts. The types that you saw, should all of them be allowed? Should we be restricting them to just detached or above a garage? And then other considerations, design standards, lot placement, where do we want them? Owner occupancy requirement is a pretty common one, and one that I recommend, which is either you as the property owner either have to live in the principal house or the accessory dwelling unit. You can't lease out both. You have to be there to watch over the property. And then there are some smaller detail ones which we can work out, but that include utilities, saying that they have to be tied to the principal house. Parking, do we require more parking for an ADU? Airbnbs, how do we regulate that? That's a whole other can of worms, which we really don't deal with. And then size limitations to keep it accessory, saying you can do a max of 800 square feet or something like that. So those are just some guiding questions, but first and foremost, what do we think of ADUs?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please go ahead.
There's a few of them that I know in the city already, and most of them that I know of were, when they built the initial house, they did it with the idea of a mother-in-law's quarters, and it was incorporated into it, and you wouldn't even know they were there, but it looks like the same house, but they're separate. And I also know people who took areas that were above the garages that were normally storage, and they converted them into, I know a couple places like that in the city where, we've kind of been doing it a all along anyway, to some extent, even before it was a city. In fact, most of them that I know of were, it was done even before it was incorporated as a city, and it was done in the 50s. So we've kind of already done this kind of thing. I think we just need to hone it a little more and make it more up to date and make it more accessible for the residents that want. And of course, they have to have the space to do it. That's I think that'd be very important too. You don't want to make the lots, so crammed that it's not feasible to do it. Like you said, you have to have extra parking and everything else that makes it, so it doesn't create problems in the neighborhood on garbage night when everyone has to, pull in. So we gotta keep all these things in mind whenever we do these things. But it is something we've already been doing, is basically what I wanted, because I know of at least probably 3 or 4 of them right off the top of my head, just in the south end of town where I come from, growing up and doing everything in the neighborhoods like I did. They've always been here. So, just that thought.
Appreciate it, thank you. Yes, please go ahead.
So I'm in favor of this as well. And yeah, I would just say we need to take a look at the lot size and make sure that everybody's not crammed in and that they do have enough, for parking. I would be interested in seeing what the ADU size should be. We have houses in the city that are already 800. So I don't know if I would say definitely 800 is a max. We might want to actually make it a smaller max, but that's something just to look into. And yes, the owner needs to live in one. They definitely need to live in one of them.
Yes, please go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I just want to point out that in some other communities I've been working with, these have been I'm not saying anything negative against this proposal, but I just say that these have been a magnet for Airbnb type complaints, both from neighbors and from enforcement perspective of communities trying to enforce restrictions on really short-term type rentals of anywhere from overnight to 2 weeks. So I would just say if you are going to go this direction, you should really have a strategy for addressing how you want to approach the Airbnb aspect of it, because that will open up issues to address, and it's better to head that off before it becomes a problem.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely think we should look at that, though I don't know that we're the most tourist attractive city. Other communities might have a little bit more on the Airbnb side, but I kind of look at this as how do we retain families that otherwise would have had to leave our city. So if you've got a garage and you can build one of these on top of your garage, that adds another 750 square feet. It allows you to keep maybe your adult child at home as opposed to running out of space. Or if you need to buy, a new house because your, aging parent is going to have to move in with you. I see this more as retaining the people that we have here and giving them an avenue, because the lot sizes are fairly small. But if you have the existing garage already, putting it on top of that, we're not adding another structure. We're just adding that dormer on top of the garage. So I don't know. I think we have to be very cautious of the specifics. It can't be like a full-on free-for-all. But I could see a scenario where, I just built a room into my basement, egress and everything, so all of my kids can have their own rooms. Wow, it's crazy, but small houses, small lots, 5-person family. So I think that we need to pay attention to that. Otherwise, we're just going to lose these folks to other communities. And I think as we do this, assuming that it passes and we can dot all the I's and cross all the T's, I think we almost need to have like an informational of how to do this. And because I think it's attractive to families that are looking for answers to really difficult questions, like a recent college grad who can't afford to buy a home because in this market they can't. How do you give them their own space? And this is a perfect answer to that type of question.
Yeah, just to echo a little bit on,
On top of what Councilman Bliss says, I definitely agree with that. Not so much, I like to work with what we already have, like we said, above the garage and things of that nature. And with families, I don't want so much encourage people from out of town to want to come in. I know for Beaumont, when you go to the neighborhoods west of Beaumont, a lot of them do that in order for people that have long stay patients at the hospital, their families will stay in some of them homes on some of the streets that are just west of Beaumont, and they do that. I don't want so much encourage that, but I do want to encourage, like Councilman Bliss said, to you know, if the in-laws that need to be taken care of, you know, bring them in, and that's kind of what families are missing nowadays, is, you know, families being all together. We've kind of lost that in this country, unfortunately, in the last several decades, and I'd like to encourage that actually more than to discourage it and get them to separate and go in different homes. So I definitely agree with what Councilman Bliss said about, you know, adding on within the means that you already have is definitely encouraging, but not so much to make a business out of it. So.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Just wanted to make sure we address, I guess we have a lot of probably non-conforming garages in the city, and we have to figure out if we're gonna grandfather in adding a story on top of existing grandfather structures. And I don't know the answer to that, but I think that if we don't address that, that's gonna eliminate probably, 75–80% of these residents from being able to take advantage of this.
I think we've, it feels like maybe some years ago, but we talked about garage heights and on lots and distances and things. So do we have some design standards that would, I guess, really preclude a lot of places from adding on top of their garage, depending on what their house situation is already?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's a great point. And same with the duplex in the missing middle housing, is we can allow for it, but if we're not changing or tweaking our dimensional standards, it could be prohibited through that means, right? So right now, our maximum height for an accessory structure is 15 feet. That's going to have to be raised, because that's going to eliminate pretty much every above garage ADU. It doesn't have to be excessive, it doesn't have to go up to 30 feet, but we'll probably have to get it up to like 20, 22 feet to allow for it. We could, to incentivize it, we could say additional height granted for ADUs, something like that. We'll probably slightly have to tweak our lot coverage standards as well to make sure, again, this is an accessory dwelling unit. If it's a detached building, it's an accessory building. So it's still subject to maximum lot coverage, setbacks. So that's how we are going to control crowding, right? We're not going to allow your entire backyard to be filled by a structure because you're still subject to accessory building standards. But we might have to tweak the exact numbers there to make this actually work. So that's something that we've been exploring in the draft.
Has there been any recommendations that came out in your discussions about the draft?
22 for height?
I guess I'm thinking, like, if my neighbor decided that he wanted to do this to his garage, and his garage is actually next to our house, and all of a sudden it was very tall, and just like staring into my backyard, I don't know how I would feel about that. And we have a lot of pretty dense neighborhoods throughout Madison Heights where you could build a garage very tall and look into lots of people's yards. So like, I'm just trying to understand what we would be allowing to have happen and the repercussions for the people in the surrounding area.
Yeah, and a lot of that we can go in through the design standards. I've seen some that say access needs to be from the interior of the lot, not the side. No decks along the side, so you can't stand out and look over your neighbor's yard. Height, potentially, as you get taller, you have to move further back from the lot lines. So there are a lot of different tools that we can use, but that's certainly a valid concern for ADUs. It's also worth noting, too, though, our current ordinance for single-family principal structures, the side setback, it's a total of 12, but on one side, you only have to be set back 3 feet from the property line. So we currently do allow very tight, very small setbacks for principal structures. Accessory structures are actually stricter than that, and they say right now they're 5 feet. So you have to go further back as an accessory structure. But those are certainly topics that need to be considered in the design standards and the placement standards for an ADU.
We do have many non-conforming that were grandfathered.
In a detached, attached, question that you've got up there, in an attached scenario, I guess what I would think about is how we would potentially be allowing duplexes anyway. And if some of those standards could apply to a person, like if I'm like, I'm just gonna build onto my house and add another one. Okay, there's some standards within the duplex language that would allow me to piggyback some of that and create some consistency for how things are being done across the city.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, is because sometimes it's hard to differentiate between, if you have an attached ADU, well, it's technically a duplex, but a duplex has two of the same size units, and an ADU has one large unit and one small unit. So that brings up another point too, is do we want to, if we're going to allow ADUs, do we allow them in our new mixed district or accessory to duplex and quadplexes? Or communities sometimes say you can only have an ADU accessory to a single family building. So we're not, to bring upon the crowding point, we're not loading too many units onto one parcel.
I can see a scenario if you said I'm gonna do a duplex on the front and maybe I've got a garage and I wanted to have an apartment above it and I'm in an area where the city is trying to encourage density. I don't see where that would actually be problematic. I can see scenarios where we would want to allow some of that.
And I would be fine with that, again, depending on the lot size. If you have the space for it, then I would be fine with that. I think a lot of this is gonna come down to the specifics. We have various sizes of lots, and different people have different setbacks. And, as has already been said, we already have a lot of, not a lot, but we already have some of these that came in long before any kinds of zoning or rules came about. So it's just a matter of, I think, in theory, it sounds like we're all in agreement we should do this. It's just getting into the weeds of what do we want? We need to come up with what is the minimum lot size and what are we going to allow and these kinds of things.
Okay.
I think in theory.
Yeah, it
we
feels
all
like
want this.
maybe seeing some examples and having a couple of discussions as the rewrite goes on will allow us to zero in and say, yeah, cool, I think we got it.
Yeah, and I think this is leading to another, sorry to invite you all guys, but another steering committee meeting to discuss the details of this, and then we can bring back the recommendations to the full planning commission.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, please go ahead.
I can remember one particular case that came before zoning where it was a gentleman wanting to read, it already been there, and he was wanting to, above a garage, and sometime in the past it had been using for some type of living quarters as it was, but he wanted to bring it back to using that. And the very problem came up with the neighbors. And he even made agreements in the process of his redoing it, the placement of the windows and the height and everything else, so that the residents wouldn't feel as intimidated. He could look off into it. So there's all kinds of different tools, like he said, that we can use to put into it that would make things work out perfectly and everyone would be happy with the results. So I don't see why and like she said, because of the different sizes of the lots and everything, it's gonna be a case by case thing. I think really, you can't just make a blanket. And this is it. We're gonna have to look at each one. That's what we have to do on zoning, so that it's not gonna be any different than what we already been doing from that perspective.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Just to add on to that too, I mean, it does help that person to stay there, but it's also going to increase the taxable value. I know I just did that basement remodel and that addition, and I've got Oakland County visiting my house for to reassess the property. So I can see a lot of benefits on that, as opposed to it, coming into, well, how do I put? People are going to do what they have to do anyway, and if they need that space, they're going to just do it. And so I think however we can make this very clear and as simple as possible, I think the better. I think we just have to do it, but I don't know. I will trust the subcommittee of people who know all of this stuff to figure out what the details are and how do we make it work within our neighborhoods. But honestly, I think people are just doing it anyway. So let's just try to get them to do it right. And collect the taxes from it.
More taxes.
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
And I think it's important too to close this out is there are certain out west, a lot of states actually say you have to allow this everywhere. And in those states, they haven't seen like a huge wave of ADUs. They happen slowly. So the fear that, you know, it's going to be overrun the city with all these popping up at once hasn't happened so far out west. It has allowed for, as Councilor Bliss said, additional housing variety. But it doesn't mean that the second that it's adopted, there's going to be ADUs everywhere. It's a slow process as people, and it's an investment to do. So
It's still gonna cost somebody like $30,000 to $50,000
Yeah.
to do, so. We're not gonna get them all on day one.
right. All right. I think that's a good topic for the subcommittee. So then, going into the mixed-use innovation topic, and this is primarily about building height. Just a refresher, the mixed-use innovation district is the second one, is intended to promote redevelopment of moderate to larger scale regional commercial centers into walkable compact developments, promote a mix of uses, and really is intended to promote infill development and redevelopment of larger scale commercial uses in the city. It, as proposed, allows for a range of commercial, office, light manufacturing, multifamily residential, including townhomes and apartments, and mixed-use developments. So we have proposed for the MUI2 the Target Big Lots strip mall, the Meijer, the Home Depot and Lowe's area, as well as the Active Adult Center and Sacra. So here's a good example, if you can see it. This is, I think it's called Madison Place, the Target Big Lots, and the most prominent feature of this whole thing is parking, right? So this district is trying to encourage a better and higher use for our abundant parking lots that aren't being used. We have a whole section here that's just going unused, causing impervious surfaces, extra stormwater drainage. So the question with the MUI2, or the intent that we want to answer, is how can we encourage redevelopment and activation of both underutilized parking areas as well as underperforming older strip malls and big box type facilities. So here's an example just to show of what we're hoping, or at least I think that the intent of the district is. Here's an example of a similar strip mall in Seattle that had a big box anchoring it at the end and all of this parking that was going unused. So Seattle planned for it, and I don't know if this has been adopted or not, but with all that extra parking, they got rid of the big box and encouraged kind of an internal street network, and these would be multifamily residential with retail and commercial on the bottom. Here's another example, I think, from another area of Washington or Seattle, where it's actually under construction. So this was all just extra parking. They got rid of it and encouraged additional housing, and I think there's some retail along this internal street network. So bringing us to the topic that was brought up at the steering committee was our current draft has a 50-foot cap in the mixed-use innovation 2 district. So this is the type of, the maximum height and the type of building that could be built with that 50-foot cap. That's about a 4, pushing on a 5-story building if they're really, not tall stories, about 10 feet per story. The question was brought up, well, should we increase this to allow for a greater density of housing, which would then support the retail that we're trying to get there? So here are some examples of other heights of buildings. This is a 6-story building that's approximately 60 feet tall. Here's a 7-story at 80 feet, and then a 10-story building at 100 feet tall. So the question we're bringing to you is this 50-foot acceptable, about 3 to 4 stories, 4 to 5 stories, or should we raise that cap and potentially allow for some taller buildings, greater housing density?
Mr. Chair, please go ahead.
I am in favor of raising it. I wouldn't go any higher than 100.
Yeah, This is, you know, and this is a pretty
Minor
urban,
chat.
urban building.
Sorry.
I think from a developer standpoint, we could raise it slightly. I think they're going to typically cut off at 55 feet to the highest occupied floor, or the bottom of the highest occupied floor, because that's Michigan definition of a high-rise, and at that point, you have to do a lot more things. But that's kind of the cutoff for, I guess, affordably building a tall building, because you've already bought elevators and things, but once you get above that, you start having to have fire command centers and a bunch of other requirements. So I guess from a
At 55?
55 to the lowest occupied floor, so the actual height of the building would be higher than that, but the floor level on the top floor that's occupied, like, so you could go like 65, 70 to get, or even a little higher to get a penthouse or something up there for mechanical equipment, but that's probably going to be a reasonable cutoff from, like, just a natural, I guess, cutoff.
So 6 floors, 6, maybe 7, you're pushing it
Yeah.
for 7, okay. Okay, then I revised that to say I would want it to be a maximum of between 65 and 80. No, that's a really good point.
I mean, if someone wants a fire command center, they could do it though, right?
Yeah, that's true, okay.
Yeah, I mean, they can, I don't want to discourage people from going higher if they want.
So say they
but,
can do 100,
yeah.
but recognize they probably won't.
That's why you probably see a lot of developers coming in and wanting to do like a 4, 5, 6-story building, because it doesn't cost a lot to get an elevator to go up a couple extra floors if you got to buy one anyway. But they don't typically like to go a lot. It's a different class of building, I guess, when you go a lot higher than that.
Okay, yeah, I guess that logically, you know, we'll probably, if we get them, we'll see more of a 6-story, but the question is, well, is there harm in allowing for someone to do it higher if they want to do it?
I mean, some of the parcels that we're talking about are really quite large. I mean, that's why you separated mixed use 1 and mixed use innovation 2, because of the scale of the properties that we're talking about. So I think giving a little bit of leeway, because if someone wants it, then okay.
And I feel like in some of these areas there are taller buildings than that already.
And while I have you, I mean, right now, so we have this parking lot, or the Madison Place as MUI2, but we actually don't have these parking lots. This is B3. So my thought is to just make these parking lots MUI2 as well. This is, you know, the back of the AMC area, and driving back there, I don't know if you've ever driven back there, there's just nothing. It's roads kind of start up in random places, so.
I would recommend
speed
taking it
bumps.
all the way to 13 Mile.
Yeah.
Because with Civic Center Park being so large, whatever we can do to encourage density around that in a residential kind of way, I think is an advantage.
Okay.
Agreed.
Makes sense.
Okay, anything else on the MUI2?
Just said I want to be over there. It seemed more fun.
Okay, and then the last topic, and thanks for being patient, this is the regulated uses discussion. So in our current zoning ordinance, we have section 10.502A, which is regulated uses. And the intent of this is to control or to limit where certain uses, and the ordinance hammers it home. It says this is blight, blighting or downgrading of the surrounding neighborhood. There's going to be detrimental impacts of these uses for the purpose of enjoying these areas. So our ordinance has what I would call 2 different categories of regulated uses. We have on the left side clearly adult-oriented, adult bookstores, cabarets, adult theaters, adult retail stores, escort agency, and a sexual encounter center, which I don't really, okay. And then we have on the right side uses that have been added over the years to this adult regulated uses theme. So that includes massage parlors, saunas and spas, pools, billiard halls, tattoo parlors, pawnbrokers, and used good uses. So the question as part of the zoning ordinance rewrite is, do all of these uses still have the same detrimental impacts, or do we feel that they do when they were put into the ordinance? For a regulated use to be approved, the underlying zoning has to be a B2 or B3. It's treated as a special use, and then there are these really strict separation requirements, 1,000 feet from existing regulated uses, and then 300 feet from churches, schools, and then the killer is residential zoning districts or any residential use. So when you take all of those separation requirements into play, we have a total of 3 parcels in the whole city where you can do it. Which is why the good use that came in for rezoning has to go to the ZBA to get a separation variance from this. And actually, these 2 parcels here are under development, so there's 1 parcel in the city. So the guiding questions, what uses, are we going to remove some of these uses? If so, what, specifically out of the non-adult oriented types, tattoo parlors, used goods, pawnbrokers, and massage parlors? If we want to remove these uses, or some of them, where should they be allowed, and in what zoning districts? And then conversely, are there other types of uses that we currently don't regulate or don't have separation requirements that should be potentially added to the regulated uses or separated out and have separation standards for them, like firearm stores, firearm ranges, hookah lounges, tobacco shops? So this came up at City Council as well, and they've asked the Planning Commission to discuss this and weigh in.
Your Honor?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I am not going to comment on the sexual encounter centers. I don't even know what that means. But I will say, my point of view, pawnbrokers and used goods, probably just tie that to anywhere that there's retail, because it's retail. Pool and billiard halls could probably go anywhere. I don't see why that's even up here. Spas could go anywhere. I also don't see why that's up here. They're in strip malls in like every other city, so I don't know why that's an issue.
And in ours.
Tattoo parlors, in my opinion, can go anywhere. Again, don't know why that's up here. I think these things may have had taboo indication or something a long time ago. I don't know how pool halls got up there. I really don't. We can have a bar super close to residential, but not a pool hall without alcohol? Like, but the bar can have pool tables in the bar, but if it's not a pool, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. I think just kind of remove those out. If it's retail, it's retail. If it's any one of these other uses, I personally don't care where they go. I think each one of them adds value into the city, so I don't know. That's my 2 cents.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
I have to agree with Councilman Bliss. At the time that these things were created, it was a whole different world. You know, you go back in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, and every one of the things on that list were considered, the people that hung around them were very shady people. And so they pretty much have changed since that period of time. Everything, the used goods, the pawn brokers, even the tattoo parlors, I've seen them in very respectable places, and the pool halls too. Like he said, you know, you get a good bar and it'll have a couple pool tables in the end. You know, God forbid them do that. So I think it's just that times have changed so much from when these things were originally put in, because it was only that part of town that was the shadiest people and the worst parts of town, and that's why they all got put into the same area, because they didn't want it to expand to the better parts of town, so to speak. I would say, wouldn't you say, Mr.
So
Councilman?
it just came to my attention that these were put in 1999. So I was a freshman in high school when we decided that tattoo parlors and pool halls were bad for the city.
And I'm wondering, they were added to the zoning ordinance in '99. I'm wondering if it was related potentially to like the business license ordinance. They were copying the business license. But yeah, I have a bunch of old copies of Madison Heights zoning ordinances from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s. So I went back and it was primarily adult uses until 99, when it changed to include tattoo parlors, billiard halls, used goods, and pawnbrokers. And then massage parlors and spas were added in 2009. So that's a fairly recent one.
I think we can just give those councils a mulligan.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please go ahead.
I'll echo the same comments. I mean, especially on the used goods uses. I mean, Royal Oak has a ton of resale shops, and I mean, they make for interesting places to go shop, and I would put pawnbrokers in that as well. I mean, it's offering something that you can't go buy from Amazon. It's someplace that brick and mortar can support, and I think that drives our, downtown areas and some of the foot traffic, and probably like to see more of those kind of things, especially if they're done well.
Yeah, and pawnbrokers just don't have the shady background that they used to have back when I was a kid, that you just automatically thought of that as being something shady. And now it's so regulated and so overseen and done so much more professional that, and they fit in with the community more, that I just don't think it's fitting anymore, to be totally honest with you. There's no other way to put it. Not like it was back when I was a kid.
So from a timing perspective, as we have some interested parties here, how long do we think ordinance rewrite until this gets resolved, or did council ask planning commission to make a recommendation about this now?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Councilman, but I don't believe there was it was a directive to the planning commission to discuss it. So, there's a couple options. One is to incorporate it and deal with it as part of the overall rewrite, which will take longer because we're touching on the whole ordinance, or separate it out and move forward with an amendment, a text amendment prior to adoption of the completely new zoning ordinance.
So in that case, would the text amendment just be to strike those out and then leave it as is till the ordinance rewrite is done?
The text amendment would, we would have to touch upon a couple different places, right? Because if we're removing them, we have to then allow for them. Logically, and Matt, could I adjust the, what's the address of, do you know what your property is zoned?
I believe
B2, okay. Yeah, so, we want to tread carefully, but a B2 district is a regional business district, and it isn't in the middle of a neighborhood. So the question is going to be, what zoning district do we want to allow them? Do any of them, in your opinion, should they require special land use approval to go through council? I think looking at a pool billiard hall can just be rolled into indoor recreation. A tattoo parlor would just be personal service, similar to a barber shop. A used good use, I don't think we need to regulate that at all. That would just be retail. And if you feel the same about pawnbroker, that would be the same. The question would be massage parlors and saunas and spas, which could be similar to like
Tattoo, same thing.
You just have to remember that if anything you modify now, if you do it separate from the zoning master use, that if something comes in and then you decide, well, that's not really what we're doing in the zoning master plan later on, there's still going to be a non-conforming use, and they can continue to be in allowed to use. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but just make sure you know that going in, that once you give an opening, then they're be allowed to be a non-conforming use, and essentially as long as they continue to comply in a legal manner as at the time they were allowed.
Well, and can you just kind of speak to the timing of the entire process? Because I personally would rather see it well thought out and taken back to the subcommittee about exactly where we want these types of things and incorporate it all in one plan instead of piecemealing it along the way.
Sure, yeah, so we are very close to having a full draft. I spoke with the consultant today, and I said I'd follow up with them later this week about our meeting, because these are, what we talked about tonight, these are pretty big changes, in my opinion, for the better, but this is what was missing from the ordinance draft, is what do we want to do about housing? There are small changes, small tweaks we're making to, the use regulations. Regulated uses is one of them, but we have a pretty complete draft, and we're hoping to bring it to Planning Commission. We're going to bring it to, have to bring it to the subcommittee before, but, you know, I wouldn't, if we do this as part of the whole rewrite, it's not going to be till late summer until we're even getting started with public hearings and all of that.
So pass through council January?
I mean, depending on how much back and forth there is. So it's not going to be within the next few months, I can tell you that, for the whole rewrite. A zoning ordinance text amendment by itself takes 2 city council meetings, 1 planning commission, typically 2 to 3 months. So it's the planning commission's call, right? You can,
What's the path for allowing, so it's regulated, right? But there is a path to approval. Is that path shorter in a singular incident?
the path for this gentleman here is similar to what the store at the corner of 13 and John R. had to go. They had to rezone the property. They had to go through special land use, and then they had to go to the ZBA for a couple of variances from the separation requirements. So that's also 2 to 3 months because you're hitting multiple boards and bodies that have to grant approval.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I'd love to do it in one fell swoop, but I'm also sitting here wondering why I've been on council for 10 years and this is still prohibited. So there's kind of that balance in there. I think previous councils made mistakes, and if we can push those through alongside, I don't think there's anybody, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if we remove out that right side from the regulated uses, I don't think that there's a member of planning commission that has a problem with that. So I don't think it would be changed when we do the full rewrite. But it does open up roughly 3 to 6 months, depending on how much back and forth, that those businesses could move into the city. Whereas now, it would be more challenging for them to do so, if at all.
Is there a recommendation in that then?
I think we do it. I want to defer to the planning commission, and if anybody has a problem with any of those items, this is probably the right time to bring it up, because we certainly won't fast track it if there's an issue with like a massage parlor going, right now where a barber shop could go, for example.
So, yeah, the massage parlor is really the one that would concern me on that side. I don't know how those are regulated, so if they're regulated the way that any other medical is regulated, then I would be fine with it. I go to the chiropractor and I get a massage there, and it's in the chiropractor's office. So I just want to make sure that that is not, that is supposed to be on that side of the aisle and not on the other side.
Do we have a definition for massage parlor that we can read to planning commission?
I probably should have said spa, to be fair. Like, I go to the spa, I don't go to the massage parlor.
Well, yeah, and again, that's a term that just, what you think
Brings
about,
up the
right?
past like we were talking.
Yeah.
Correct, yeah.
So, but people, people go for massages all the time at
I do
reputable.
chiropractor, like you said.
Yeah.
We did the same thing, so.
Like
We even define massage itself.
Of course we do.
A massage parlor, it's very detailed. Massage parlor, sauna, spa is any business establishment whose principal business is the practice of massage, as defined above, and which has a fixed place of business where any person, firm, association, or corporation carries on any of these activities as defined in this section as the principal use or as an incidental or accessory use in excess of the limits provided in the definition of massage. Then it says it's a regulated use. And then we have massage establishment. Okay. Massage itself, massage does not include medical diagnosis, practice of physical therapy, high velocity, low amplitude thrust to a joint, electrical stuff, it's very detailed. But just to give, when someone comes in to our office and asks if they can open up a massage parlor, we have to ask, are you a licensed physical therapist? And if they say no, we say you're regulated use, you're subject to these standards.
There are lots of massage places and lots of retail fronts in lots of cities.
Massage Lux,
So-
Massage Envy, chains.
So a proper masseuse has some kind of regulation, like,
They have a license.
they have a license,
Definitely,
they have
yeah.
some kind of license, but there's multiple types of massage. Like, yeah, it could be physical therapy, it could be someone who does Reiki, it could be someone who does aromatherapy, like, there's all sorts. So I guess if there's a way that we could change that wording, however, to say, as long as you are properly licensed
Yeah.
by the state to do one of these types of massages, then it would be fine.
Is
Yeah,
that
so
language
we-
in there?
Sorry?
Is that language in the?
Well, we do
link
say
that
what a massage therapist is someone that is.
That's
who
yet another
engage-
designation.
Who engages in the practice of massage and is licensed under the state act.
Yeah.
But we don't allow massage. Oh, no, we do, well, we allow physical therapy.
There's a lot of overlap as
Yeah.
well. Someone who has a
Kim's is
aromatherapy might
massage
be a physical
parlor.
therapist or might not be, or they might do
They've got a
acupuncture.
business license.
That one may need to
Kim's
wait
Oriental Spa.
till we
Yeah,
get to
they're licensed.
Chairman?
Yeah.
On a related but unrelated note, not about massages, but about specifically pawn shops, and I was trying to find the report that was done for council. I know that the police department had voiced concerns about, we've had other pawn shops in the community that have, I guess they're highly regulated, and they do have an issue with having those so close to residential. So that is something that we probably want to look a little closer at instead of just opening it. I wish I could remember the date. I would have the report.
Maybe we can put this on our next agenda and then decide what to do at that point if we're gonna recommend changes. But it gives a chance to dig a little bit deeper and read the 17 paragraphs of massage parlors and spas.
Would you like staff to prepare, this would be a discussion item at the next planning commission, correct? Not draft language at this point,
I think so.
Mr. Chair? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if we had some sample language and what your recommendation would be from a staff's viewpoint, that would be helpful, I think, to us. But then the planning commission can make the decision at that point. Do we move forward with an individual rewrite on this, or do we wait for the larger rewrite?
I think I agree. The draft language makes it much more easier to determine what we're actually recommending, because it's easy to hear all these different comments and say, yeah, I agree with that, but unless you know exactly what you're agreeing to, it's kind of difficult to make a recommendation.
That makes sense.
Okay. So at this point, yeah, I'm not going to, Mr. Chair, it's still going to be discussion. I can bring draft language, but I won't notice anything at this point for a public hearing.
Okay, thank you.
I like that.
Okay, well, that's all I had. It was a very productive discussion. I appreciate it. And I think this is going to help us round out the first complete draft of the zoning ordinance. I might be contacting the steering committee to set up a meeting to go into more detail about, sounds like accessory dwelling units and maybe some design standards. But I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any more comments or questions for Planner Matt on this? Okay, all right. Next up is new business, of which there's none. Member updates. Are there anybody want to address Planning Commission? Okay. Planner updates. Mag, anything else for us?
The only thing that it's exciting is we put out a request for proposals for a downtown streetscaping plan. This one is going to focus on 11 Mile, but we're hoping to get a good just general design concept for 11 Mile within the DDA, and then B, some actual engineering plans to redefine the street and redo the streetscape so that we can be eligible for grant money, open up that source of funding. So we're excited to get that started as well.
Can you get a bike path for the mayor? And others as well?
And a bike rack.
Mr. Chair, real quick.
Yes,
with
please.
The Amazon spot, it looks like that fell through. Is there any plans to, fill that area?
Not that I'm aware of, or, yeah, unfortunately, didn't work out.
Okay.
Chair.
Yes.
Is there anything happening in front of the Meyer? Is there anything planned there, or did they just clear that out for fun
Yeah,
of it?
Mr. Chair, there's a development, this apparently dates back to the late 90s, I think, with the owner, Mr. Frankel. There's a development agreement in place that sets out what can be built there, but we have no formal site plan submittal or anything.
Okay.
But prohibited use is a car wash, so we know that that can't go there.
Okay.
He asked to put a car wash and a massage parlor there, so I have told him that he should reconsider.
No pool tables?
Okay. All right, anybody else? Okay, all right, thank you, everybody. We will adjourn.
Thanks. 50, all right, you got your 10 minutes to, yeah.
Do you have time? No?
I do, yes.
Because you only half had my attention
Yeah, all right.
yesterday.
You know, we did have a massage.
Sounds like we're gonna have a discussion.
Wow.
They took all the berms out, and now I have to look at the Meyer.
But when I just looked at, oh, it's very unfavorable. But when I just Googled it, it's permanently closed. But I did just do their business license, and theirs is a little more expensive than any other business. They do a full background check on every employee. And we have a whole box from them because they had a incident many years ago with legal workers.
If we agree on the
It was more than just 390 days. That's probably where that language was from. Seriously, I think some of the figures line up.
$200. They reference.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It sounds like
Yeah,
they're interested in getting a C of O, but they just didn't.
Right. I mean, I think they're more common. Yeah.
Like July.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Tim's is not like that. That's all it is. Thank you guys. Have a good night. You got your water bottle.
We could do Gettings in June and then do.
Right, well, that's how, they're all one bedroom or studio. And that actually, in my opinion, actually takes care of, we don't regulate Airbnbs, right? You can Airbnb your house out
It's
if you
nice
have
to
a
see
right.
you, Cliff.
I think maybe.
How are
So
you
with an
doing?
EDU, because they're so small, you're not getting parties.
Oh,
You're
really?
getting a couple.
So I'm gonna have to have a meeting to get a vote with a quorum, but maybe we do
Much.
something like refreshments.
Oh, yeah, well, that was so stupid.
God.
It sounds like we're the planning commission's supportive of it, it's just now a matter of, getting this, yeah.
We could do it on July 31st.
Oh,
You're
Right.
gonna know their timeline, you said, next week?
Well, that's, I mean, I'm fortunately, the
Aw.
height, we gotta raise the height, because right now we allow
Friday.
15 feet, which is not gonna get you a second story. So we gotta up the height.
Yeah, right,
Probably
exactly.
to 20, 22 stories.
Well,
And then you gotta deal with, people are never leaving and complain, like, oh,
I
they're
always
looking over
say
my,
when I leave here, I go to my second job, my kids,
nothing,
and
yeah.
it never ends. I swear, I don't sit down
Right.
until 9:30 p.m. And I'm like,
Yeah, it's supposed to, I mean, the intent, it's twofold. It helps people that need housing.
yeah,
And if you rent it out, it gets more money in your pocket.
at least relax a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, you design things, say no windows on the side of the house. There are things you can put down, but it's, yeah, I'm hoping it gets through.
Friday. Nobody wants to work Friday night.
Yeah, well, and it's,
Yeah,
like, my
so-
dad has Parkinson's, and he just,
Yeah.
the doctor just said, you
Yeah,
can't
that's
drive
true.
anymore. So I live,
Well, that's nice
in Oak
about
Park
that.
near like downtown Ferndale, so my
Right.
parents are talking about moving. I'm like, I should just build something outside my garage, you can live there, and my dad can walk to places instead of having to drive, you know? So, yeah, thanks for the quote. Yeah, thank you.
I don't mind having like a smaller playscape towards the back. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so
It's been a while. Good to see you too, sir.
Good to see you.
Just wanted to-
Yeah.